Hello, this is Jane Coombs of workingwellsolutions.com, and today I'm going to talk to you about stress in the workplace. This is quite a long presentation and I'll whiz through it, but you have the opportunity to go back at any time and look at any of the slides. Let's start. The health and safety executive have their own definition of what stress is, and it's worth reading this out. It's the reaction people have to excessive pressures or other types of demand placed on them. So for everyone, there are different levels of excessive pressures. So for some, it's not very much, and for others, they can go on for ages without a break. At work, you're covered by health and safety legislation, which means your employer can't take advantage of you. And if you do, then you have recourse to legislation. So the biggest one, of course, is the Health and Safety at Work Act, which came in 1974, which places main duties on employers to look after their workers or anybody affected by their work. The management of health and safety at work regulations looks at risk assessment. So they're asking employers to do a risk assessment. If they don't, then the worker who's suffering from stress can sue the employer. So here's some key points on the law, and I'll leave you to read those. But the Equality Act is quite an important piece of legislation that looks at making reasonable adjustments for those who are suffering from mental health disorders or those suffering from stress. And this is a well-known graphic representation of what happens in the body when there is stress. So what you can see here down the bottom is the demands and pressure curve against performance. So everybody needs a little bit of pressure, otherwise you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. But as that pressure rises, then things begin to happen. So first of all, red alert, off you go, you're performing well. As the demands and pressure rises, then more energy is required. What happens in the body is start producing fight or flight chemicals, which enables you to deal with danger in a prehistoric sense. If you do deal with the danger or the task as we see it, then it returns to normal. But the pressure curve looks at how levels of pressure work linked to that first slide. So you can see if you don't get enough stimulation, then you get bored, and that in itself can be quite stressful. Then you go into your comfort zone where your performance is optimum and you can maintain it. Then you begin to get to the stretched, where you're not really in your comfort zone, as this shows. But if that doesn't subside, then you start going into a strain because of all the chemicals, because of being tired, you begin to panic, and you can see then that your performance really begins to fall off and you're not performing well at work. So on the health and safety executive site, there are some causes of stress which they enumerate there, and there will be a reference at the end of this slide which talks about those. But we're talking about demands. Relationships are very important in the workplace. Life events and change in the workplace, or life events like having a baby, marriage, selling your house, divorce, all of these things have an impact on the individual. And then you've got threats. That's internal threats from yourself and external threats that come from your environment. So what happens when you get all these chemicals? You get some sort of changes happening. You get psychological, so you start getting very anxious. You could get depressed if you're predisposed to go that way. Physically, you could have your immune system deteriorating, start picking up little bugs, lots of colds. And behavioural, so you could be drinking more, you could become more aggressive, you could be smoking more. All of these added together means that you're not actually helping yourself. So here's some hazards. The interesting one there is home working. A lot of people believe that to be a treat, but for some people the isolation and not being with their colleagues is in fact quite daunting. And here are some more, and I'm sure you'd be able to add your own to that. This is likely to cause stress for some, perhaps not all of us, and at different times as well. There's also gender differences. Men and women have different stressors, and personality differences. They talked about personality A, always rushing, always in a hurry, on time, perfectionist, and type B, a bit laid back. So if you're type B, you're not supposed to get quite so stressed, although a lot of this has been challenged recently. The perception of control. So can you stop it? Is it happening to you? Are you able to do anything about it? And then if you're a perfectionist, or you like things done just so, or things must absolutely be like this. So coping styles, how do you cope with stress? Do you solve problems or do you walk the other way? Are you able to think differently about things? Do you talk about people? Are you able to think about things differently or take advice from people? And one of the best ways, of course, is physical exercise or relaxation method. So who is most at risk? We've already talked about type A personalities. Interesting, people who travel extensively, they get very tired. They're actually working when they should be sleeping. Their body clocks all over the place. There are 3 aspects of stress, and that's the causes, the signs and symptoms, and individual differences. So for this presentation, you can't say particularly that one person would be suffering from stress. Let's go to what actually happens in your body when you are in that stressful situation. Your brain goes on a red alert, prepares your body for action. Your muscles tense, and then you get some changes in your bodily function, because what's happening is you're prepared to fight the enemy. And in order to fight the enemy, in this case it may be workload, you're coming up with a prehistoric response to how you would deal with that. So you get all of these things happening. If this happens too much, or if this doesn't resolve, then all of these changes start to have long-term effects on the system. So you can get anxiety, migraines, obviously depression. Here are some of the well-known causes of stress at work. As I say, this won't affect everyone, but it can affect a number of us. Decision latitude is an interesting one. It's how much control you have about your workplace, and work-life balance. For those who work long hours, they have little time to relax in the evening or weekends. In order for the workplace to be relatively stress-free, you need to look at the jobs, making sure you get the right person in the right job. If things are going to change, then talk to the employee about how to do that and any changes to the job. Often the employee will know how changes will affect production. Right at the beginning, we should be looking at identifying the job requirements and the experience of the person needed for the job, and making sure we test that experience. Linked to that is early training and instruction on the job and any particular pressures there might be. So if you get all of those things right, it's likely there's going to be less stress on the individual. Again, you're looking at the job design and workload and schedules, smart objectives and support. It's very important. However, the higher you go up the organisation, it seems to me that there's less. Relationships at work, key issue here. Interpersonal conflict, bullying, racial or sexual harassment. Now we all know that that's not supposed to happen, but again we all know that it does tend to happen. If there are problems with bad behaviour, training on interpersonal skills may be appropriate. The management style of your manager is highly influential in if and when you suffer stress, but there are some behaviours that workers find difficult to deal with just in themselves without the workload. There is lots of information available and self-administered questionnaires where managers can be aware of their styles and the effect this can have on their workers. Communication, of course, is highly important. Effective delegation, objective setting, and building a team, supporting the individual. So what we're saying here is that somebody has an incident of stress, they've come to you. You need to find out the nature of the, let's call it illness. Is it work related or is it just made worse by work? Is it likely to recur? Has there been any other absences due to stress prior to this incident? Have they called it something else like a cold or a tummy upset when they've been off? That needs to be explored. The employer also needs to tell the employee that they do have to have the work done, so it does need to be sorted out. And the impact of the absences on those who work, they will have to do more if somebody's off sick with stress. The health professionals will be able to gauge the effect of stress on the individual, how this can be dealt with, and the options for the employer has been explained to the employee. In a workplace, what should you have? You must have a policy on stress in the workplace that applies to all workers. Treat everybody the same. Discover the true medical condition of the individual workers, and you can send them off to the Occupational Health Services if you have one. Is it likely to be covered by the Equality Act? Because if it is, you have to take steps to make sure that you're adapting the work to suit the individual. Maybe you can give them a different job or make reasonable adjustments to the workplace. That's not to say that you're making a job specially, but that you've looked at the employee and tried to help them stay in work. But above all, you must consult with the worker because they know what's causing the problems, and it's no use making suppositions. Occupational health professionals, that's me. We're impartial, independent in the workplace. We can negotiate a way back to work or improve attendance the best way. Can think about getting them back on a stepped program, or perhaps change shifts that might help them. Occupational health also understand the employment law that we talked about at the beginning, and the HSC do regard occupational health professionals as competent persons to be able to assess and deal with stress in the workplace. However, it is the manager's decision about whether to accept the recommendations or not. So here are the 5 steps for risk assessment, and this can be applied to stress in the workplace. There's more work around this on the HSC website. Excellent tables, questionnaires, approaches. These again are the steps. And for the individual, they play a part in their own stress levels. They need to think about what they're doing as well to help the situation and themselves. And here are some ways that they can do this. I particularly like the relaxation and time management, but also assertiveness. Assertiveness training gives workers the skills to be able to say no without becoming aggressive. Time management, as I say, tasks should be divided up into these 4 areas. So it's urgent or non-urgent. Are they important or not important? What you find is most people who are not good with time management spend a lot of time in square 4, where it should be really dealing with 1 and 2. So let's go back to the HSC definition of stress. The reaction people have to excessive pressures or other types of demands placed on them. It arises when they worry that they can't cope. If you follow the steps that I've talked about here and look at these resource lists, you'll be able to understand more fully about what's required of you and your organisation. I hope you found this presentation useful. If you have enjoyed it, please tick the thumbs up. For more information about health and work, why not pop over to my website, that's www.workingwellsolutions.com, and sign up for my monthly newsletter, or even have a look about stress on my website. Thank you for listening.